Second edition of Ian Cameron's Football Frenzy for Pub Sports Radio. Looking forward to it. Thursday, September the 17th. We've got NFL Week 2 action on tap this week. Now it's nice to handicap Week 2, I find, every single season. You get overreactions to what we saw with each and every team in their first game. All of a sudden, a team looks horrible. People want to throw them in the garbage can. A team looks great, plays a perfect game, both sides of the football. And all of a sudden, people want to anoint them as Super Bowl champions. You get those kind of takeaways from various people after the first week of the season. And it's not just bettors and handicappers that do it. Casual fans do it. In fact, casual fans are probably a bigger culprit of falling into that, mindset of, team looks horrible in week 1. It's going to repeat itself for 15 more games this season. And on the flip side, team looks great in week 1. That's also going to repeat itself for another 15 weeks. So you got to be careful falling into that sort of mindset, that sort of predicament. You want to make sure you leave the door open for improvement for teams that look bad in week 1. And you also want to leave the door open for teams that look good to maybe in the future not have that same kind of game. I think there's a few teams that are going to fall into that category. And as we go through this NFL Week 2 card, we'll definitely be able to point some of those situations out. Some just overall thoughts of Week 1 before we break down each and every game from the NFL Week 2 card. And that's what we'll be doing here every week on the Pub Sports Radio YouTube channel here on Ian Cameron's Football Frenzy, coming to you live every single Thursday at 1 o'clock p.m. Eastern time during the football season. We're going to look back briefly on what we saw in week 1. I'll just talk about first of all, a couple of teams that looked good. The Buffalo Bills certainly did against the New York Jets, really controlling the game on both sides of the football. And the box score is going to tell you that, oh, look at the Jets. They put up some yards. They were pretty competitive in that game. One of those classic situations where, and this is why I think being an observational handicapper and bettor like I am, like I treasure being able to watch games. And I know there's some people that are math people, numbers guys. They just bet numbers. They're not going to watch a second of the game action that takes place. I can't imagine me personally betting and handicapping that way. I got to see these games because there are always going to be instances, often, when the box score tells you the game played out in this kind of fashion, and you actually watch the game and it ends up being something completely different. So that's always something that's one of the greater values I get from watching the games, is being able to see what is going to end up happening with teams in the game where the box score may not exactly be telling the truth. And if you look at the Bills-Jets box score, you're going to see pretty solid yardage count for the New York Jets, but how much of that was when they were trailing and they were already getting their asses kicked in the first half of that game? In fact, the Bills, if not for a bad day from their rookie field goal kicker, who missed a couple field goals one in the first half and one in the second half as well. And if not for a couple Josh Allen fumbles, I think both of them were in plus territory. One of them was in the red zone when the Bills were driving for more points. Not for those, things could have been even worse here for the New York Jets in that game. But the Bills were very solid. No question about that. Let's give the Arizona Cardinals a lot of credit. They were on my card last week, getting a touchdown. I actually got them at plus 7.5. It was down to about 6.5 by the time kickoff came around, and the Arizona Cardinals went into San Francisco, home of the defending NFC champions, and got the outright win as underdogs at San Francisco. And the thing that stuck out to me is no adjustment period needed for arguably the best receiver in the NFL in DeAndre Hopkins. I mean, his ability, what did he have? 14 catches, over 100 receiving yards in the victory for the Arizona Cardinals, already showing tremendous amounts of chemistry, cohesion, and just knowing, when Murray knows where he's going to be, Hopkins made himself get open so that Kyler Murray could find him. And it was just really impressive to see Arizona offensively in that game against a very, very good San Francisco defense, in San Francisco. So that was really impressive. And even the Arizona Cardinals defense, which was their Achilles heel last year, They lost a lot of close games, and a lot of it was because the defense at key moments in the football game just couldn't get a stop, couldn't force a turnover, and it ended up costing them, several games at the end of the day. But the good news is for Arizona is their defense looks a lot better early in the season as well, just with that first game. So they look good. And one more thing I'll touch on before we get into week 2, the teams with the new head coaches, in college football, this is a big time issue because of, the coronavirus pandemic. Practice time has been nullified. The amount of preparation, putting in actual hours in person, in the film room, so to speak, in the classroom, whatever you want to call it. But, gathering the team together to teach them the system, the scheme for these new coaches that are bringing in new coordinators and new philosophies on both sides of the football. It's already tough enough for a new head coach with a new football team, pro or college, to implement his new system and get players to be on the same page executing that system in the first couple of weeks of the season. It's already difficult in a normal season, in a normal scenario. You throw in the coronavirus pandemic into this mix, and you throw it into this pot and stir it around, and it is becoming almost a nightmare for some of these new head coaches to adequately have their teams ready to go, in the first couple weeks of the season. And that is something that you've got to be concerned about. We're seeing it in college football as well. The new head coaches with their teams, head coaches with their new teams, really, really struggling straight up in ATS. Last week in the NFL, new head coaches with their new team, 1-4, straight up and against the spread. The only coach to win last week as a head coach of a new team was Ron Rivera with the Washington football team, coming back to beat the Philadelphia Eagles outright as underdogs. That was it. The other coaches, Joe Judge with the New York Giants, that was a straight up and ATS loss for them against Pittsburgh. We saw Mike McCarthy with the Dallas Cowboys. That was a straight up and ATS loss for them against the LA Rams on Sunday Night Football. We saw Matt Rule with the Carolina Panthers. That was one of my plays last week, laying the field goal with Las Vegas in that game. Carolina loses straight up in ATS. A narrow loser there, only lost 34-30. It was a close game, but nevertheless, Matt Rule comes up short straight up in ATS in his first game as the head coach of the Carolina Panthers. And the other one is Kevin Stefanski, and we'll get to him and his team in just a second. The Cleveland Browns, they get romped by the Baltimore Ravens. So there you go, 1-4 straight up in ATS for those not first year head coaches, but head coaches in their first year with a new team. Those coaches and those teams went 1-4 straight up and ATS in week 1. Now, when I see a trend like this, first of all, I don't blindly bet on or bet against trends, but they've got to be, if I'm going to follow them, they have to be trends that exist for a reason. You're going to see this 26 and 15 ATS off a loss when they're a divisional dog since 1996. No, I don't follow those kind of trends. Sorry, I don't. Different players, different coaches, different eras of football. Those aren't the trends that I value. A trend like this one, 1-4 straight up in ATS for head coaches in their first year with a new team in an unforeseen circumstance such as this, where you've just had very little time to prep, proper time to prep, especially in person, trying to get new schemes implemented. You've had limited practice time, limited amount of training camp compared to a normal offseason, no preseason games whatsoever. Put it all together, and I could see this trend, maybe being a successful one to keep betting for at least another week, potentially even 2 weeks. This could be a situation where for Joe Judge and Kevin Stefanski and Matt Rule, and even the two veteran coaches, head coaches in this scenario, Mike McCarthy and Ron Rivera, it could take time for this group of coaches to get their teams exactly firing on all cylinders and on the same page. So this is definitely, and I've made a point of it, going to be a stat and a coaching trend that I keep an eye on. Is this just a 1 week thing with the struggles of these 5 coaches in their first year with a new team? Or is this going to be something that maybe has a carryover effect moving forward into week 2 and beyond? So that is definitely the thing that stuck out to me, was that we have now seen in both NFL and in college football. These coaches in their first year with a new team have definitely had some difficulty getting their teams prepared and ready to play at a high level. And we'll have to see if that carries over. Speaking of carrying over, will the Cleveland Browns' ineptitude and utter embarrassing play on the football field carry over into week 2? We're going to begin the week 2 card as we will every week here on the show. We'll begin it with the Thursday night football matchup, the Cleveland Browns taking on the Cincinnati Bengals. We've got Cleveland 6-point favorites here, the total 43.5 in this game. This is early in the week. I've got games circled. I'm interested in betting this game. I'm interested in betting that game. And I've just got the week because I want to save myself time. I'm not going to bang my head against the wall researching, reading up on a game that I have very little interest betting on early in the week. Normally, that's the way I do it. And early in the week, so I had my games circled. I had, Detroit Green Bay circled, Carolina Tampa Bay circled, Colts Vikings circled, Patriots Seahawks. There's a bunch of games that I'm like, okay, I'm at least interested in the side and or total. In all of those games, I'm going to circle them now, Sunday night, Monday morning, so I can spend an extra amount of time looking into those games, researching them, looking up stats, looking up season history, watching some more highlights and extended game highlights from the teams involved in the game that I want to consider betting from last week. I want to see maybe a little bit more how they played, how the offensive line look, how did they get a pass rush? Did the secondary hold up down the field in the passing game? All those kind of things. So I'll go back and look at some extended highlights from the game the previous week involving the two teams in the game that I've circled. Anyway, getting back to Cincinnati, Cleveland, this was not one of the games I had circled early in the week. I'm like, when I first looked at the line and the situation and these two teams in this Battle of Ohio, I'm like, Cleveland -6. There's no way I could find myself getting interested in laying 6 points with Cleveland here. Not at all. But on the flip side, I looked at it and I said, Cincinnati +6, rookie quarterback, short week, lack of prep time. That is a long-term negative betting situation in the NFL. It's been really poor ATS going back several years, especially in September, the first month of the year. Rookie quarterback, first month of the season on a short week. That's usually not the kind of betting situation you want to get involved with. And that's what we have here with Cincinnati. So I'm like, right away, you know what? Probably not going to get involved in this game because I don't really want to go with the Bengals here on a short week with the rookie QB Joe Burrow. But can you really lay 6 with Cleveland after the way they looked last week and Odell Beckham Jr., falling out of favor with this team and maybe on his way out? He had a poor game. Who didn't have a poor game last week against Cleveland? It was an embarrassment, really, against the Baltimore Ravens. A very good an excellent Baltimore Ravens team. Let's not act like Cleveland, lost to an also-ran or a bottom feeder. They lost to one of the best teams in the NFL, and they're right there on my power ratings. They're right there about even right now in my power ratings in the AFC with Kansas City. I mean, it's those two teams and everybody else in the AFC as far as I'm concerned. So it's not a bad loss in terms of who you lost to. It's a bad loss in terms of how you lost. I mean, you just got your butts kicked. I mean, where was the pass rush on Lamar Jackson? The secondary was shredded. We'll get to the injuries that Cleveland's dealing with in the secondary going into this game in just a second. The offensive line was poor, and Baker Mayfield making hideous throws and terrible decisions once again, which has now become a carryover thing. That was a problem last year, especially in the second half of the season. And part of me said, you know what, Freddie Kitchens is a moron. He was a dumbass coach from the beginning. He never should have gotten that job. He was a terrible play caller as well. I mean, it takes some kind of special idiot to run 4th and 7 draw play from the 40-yard line and think that's going to work against an NFL defense. But Freddie Kitchens thought that, nevertheless. And so I left the door open that maybe some of Mayfield's problems and decision-making issues were caused by bad coaching and not being prepared and just the scheme not being right. And Kevin Stefanski would clean some of that up for the Cleveland Browns. But same issues with Mayfield last week, just forcing balls into coverage, not doing a really good enough job in my mind. So Early in the week, I'm like, I'm not going to get involved in this game. Lo and behold, the week goes on, and you're reading more and more about what Cleveland's dealing with from an injury standpoint going into this game. And I've changed my tune a little bit. This Cleveland team now, Jarvis Landry is going to play. That's the good news. That's one bit of good news for the Cleveland Browns is that Jarvis Landry, who has top receiver, will play for them here in this game. Thank goodness for that. But you then look at the offensive line. You look at the left tackle, Jedrick Wills. You look at the center, J.C. Treader. The right tackle, Jack Conklin. They're all questionable. That's 3 starting offensive linemen that may or may not play in this game tonight. Then you turn it to the secondary. Cluster injuries there as well for the Cleveland Browns. Greedy Williams, Kevin Johnson. Neither of those guys played last week against the Baltimore Ravens. They've already been ruled out for this game against Cincinnati tonight. So you have cluster injuries on the O-line, cluster injuries in the secondary, a pass defense that was shredded last week, by the way, with that depleted secondary, and an offensive line that, again, missing 3 key starters on that O-line. That's not a team I'm laying 6 with on a short week. No way. So then the question for me became, can I make a case for Cincinnati? Can I do it? Can I take the 6 with them? And if you watched, first of all, if you looked at the box score last week with Joe Burrow against the Chargers, you would have looked at it and you would have said, that's nothing special. It's typical blop performance in his first NFL start from a rookie quarterback. And it's true. The numbers don't jump off the page at you about Joe Burrow on the stats sheet in the box score against the Chargers last Sunday. Pedestrian completion rate, pedestrian yardage, passing through the air. And it's nothing that's going to wow you and say, wow, this guy was phenomenal. But if you watch the game, and again, this goes back to me being an observational bettor. If you watch the game with the Bengals and the Chargers on Sunday, you saw a Joe Burrow that was in control of the offense, didn't make mistakes, turnover-free game for him, made plays when they were there. When there was nobody open, he didn't mind tucking the football and running with it and creating yards with his feet, which he's capable of doing. All of that. And then, of course, with the game on the line and the Chargers trailing by 3, Joe Burrow in his first opportunity to put together a game-tying or maybe even game-winning drive in the last few minutes against a Chargers, and that's not a sieve defense either that the LA Chargers have. That is a very good Chargers defense. He ended up going down the field, making good throws, accurate throws, even some into very tight windows when it was well covered by that Charger secondary. He was fitting balls in there to Tyler Boyd and AJ Green. And I was impressed with the poise, flat out. I was completely impressed with the poise that we saw from Joe Burrow in that game against the LA Chargers. He did everything you could have asked him to do in putting his team in position to win that football game. But we all know what happened after that. It was Randy Bullock missing the field goal, hurting himself in the process, and the Bengals fall short. But if you watch, again, that's again where the box score doesn't tell the whole story. Box score says he was all right. It was an okay game. Not bad. You watch the game, like I did, you see Joe Burrow played pretty well, even though the stats may not show that, against a very good defense as well. So I like that. And in terms of the Thursday night football, the long-term thought process that a lot of bettors have is you can't bet the road team on Thursday night on a short week. That I take that more with a bigger grain of salt later in the season. October, November, December NFL. When you're playing on the Thursday night as a road team on a short week, that to me matters more in October. In November and December, injuries are mounting by then. You're playing every week. You're starting to get a little bit of wear and tear physically and mentally as you get, into past the first month of the season. And the long-term ATS stats bear that out, that if you're going to try betting road teams on Thursday night football, you're better off betting them in September rather than later on in the season. Because again, this Thursday night road team spot is not quite as significant or as much of a detriment to these road teams in the first month as it is in November and December, and even in October as well. So that's just something to keep in mind there. So I leave the door open more in that first month of the season, September, to back these road teams. And for me, it's Cincinnati here, plus the 6 points. It's a half unit play for me. And I want to make note of that. It's going to be a very, very, it's a smaller play. I have a half unit, 1 unit, and 2 unit betting scale. Everybody knows that. People that have been subscribers of my sports service for years know that. It's a half unit, 1 unit, and 2 unit scales, betting scale that I use. Half unit are the smaller plays. 1 unit are my normal top plays. And then 2 units, which are very rare for me, very rare, are best bets. And it's got to be something that really jumps off the page at me to be betting it for 2 unit best bets. And that's because, and I use that unit scale because it's the best way to build a bankroll. It's hard to tell people, you know what, you build your bankroll and I'll give you this 50 unit play and this 500 unit play like some morons out there do. That's not the way to build your bankroll. Be realistic, be disciplined, use a realistic unit scale like that. That's how you build the bankroll. So and it's worked for me for years, going with half unit, 1 unit, 2 unit as per play as my bankroll management unit structure. So for me, this Cincinnati look is plus 6 is a half unit. Again, I can't go too big on it with the fact that this is a short week and rookie quarterback here. But again, people will say rookie quarterback, short week on the road. It's not that big of a road trip. It's the same state, Cincinnati to Cleveland, not a big deal. But again, for Cleveland, a lot of issues right now. Injuries along the O-line, injuries in the secondary. I don't trust them. I also like the under a little bit here in this game as well, 43.5. That one as well is something I'll probably be looking at. Back betting as well for under 43.5 in this one. So that's where I'd go with Thursday Night Football. Bengals plus 6 and under 43.5 here in this game. Cincinnati defense is solid up front, especially. And the Browns offensive line still is a work in progress. I know they made moves to try to upgrade that unit in the offseason, but they still had some protection breakdowns last week in the game against Baltimore. That's still a unit that's got to keep on improving in my mind. So I am involved now on Thursday night. Cincinnati plus 6 and also looking under the total 43.5. As far as a prop goes for tonight, I cashed this prop last week. If you follow me on Twitter at Bobano, I posted this prop from the Chargers-Bengals game. Joe Burrow rushing yards over, cashed last week. There's already been an adjustment. Joe Burrow's rushing yards last week, I believe, were 14.5, 15.5. They're now 25.5 now for Joe Burrow rushing yards in the game tonight. I still lean to the over in it. I actually probably will bet it again. But even though there has been an adjustment, one thing Cleveland has is a very solid front. A front seven that's probably going to flush Joe Burrow out of the pocket more than on a few occasions tonight. And he's going to probably have to make some plays with his feet. I could see him getting to 26 or more rushing yards tonight. So Joe Burrow over 25.5 rushing yards is definitely a prop that catches my eye for the Thursday Night Football game tonight. Let's go to Sunday now. Atlanta Falcons, Dallas Cowboys, Dallas 4.5-point favorites, 52.5 the total in this game. A lot of money coming in on Atlanta. In fact, Dallas was around 6.5, 7 point favorites at home early in the week, now down to 4.5 in this game. Of course, Mike McCarthy falls into the first year with a new team head coaching angle that went 1-4 straight up and against the spread last week. And for all of these coaches in this scenario, McCarthy, Rule, Judge, Rivera, and Stefanski, I am not betting on them until I see consistent point spread success from any of them. Doesn't mean I'm automatically betting against them either, but I'm definitely taking a cautious, safe, conservative approach in terms of betting against or betting on, I should say, these teams or these coaches that are in their first year with a new team. Dallas there were some things to like about them last week. I thought their defense got better as the game went on, which is good to see. They've still got a solid front seven linebacking core, although it did take a hit with Leighton Vander Esch's neck injury in that game. So they're going to be a little bit down a man in the linebacking core. But so their front seven's decent, but secondary still has a bunch of concerns. And obviously, if you're the Dallas Cowboys, you're facing now Atlanta offensively. I'll be honest, was disappointing a little bit for me last week. The way they bogged down completely, they stubbed their toe quite a bit. I was hoping to see Atlanta's offensive line be better. Because I thought when they got that strong finish to the season last year, where they went, I believe, won 6 of their last 8 games, the offensive line was part of that. They did a better job protecting Matt Ryan, but that offensive line could not hold up against Seattle last week. Let's not forget Seattle got rid of Jadeveon Clowney as well, so there was some moving parts to their pass rush going into that game last week, and still the Atlanta Falcons had a bit of a tough time keeping Matt Ryan clean in that game. We'll have to wait and see. DeMarcus Lawrence obviously has to play a whole lot better this year for the Cowboys. I thought he was a disaster for the money he was getting paid. They have, and the secondary still worries me. So, and when you're facing Julio Jones and Calvin Ridley, in terms of top tier receivers, that could be an issue. They're going to have to get pressure. And if they don't get to Matt Ryan could pick them apart, because this Cowboys secondary, personally, I don't see them stopping the Atlanta receiving core. The key for Dallas is they're going to have to make sure they get similar amount of pressure on Matt Ryan that Seattle was able to apply against him last week. On the flip side, the Cowboys offense, people just raving about it, gushing about it, could be one of the best offenses in the NFL this season, if not in a few years, with Dak Prescott and Zeke Elliott, Amari Cooper, and now CeeDee Lamb added to the receiving core. They looked okay. They looked okay against the Rams. I wouldn't say they looked like this juggernaut, explosive, high-flying offense that everybody thought they would be going into the season. So, it's a work in progress. The problem for Atlanta is, man, their defense, was decent against the run, but it's going to be an issue, I think, for them moving forward. Seattle's offense, I think, had it too easy against Atlanta's defense in the first game of the season, and it's going to be tough, I think, for Dallas's defense to match up here. Dallas's offense against Atlanta's defense, that could be a matchup where they have the advantage as well. I really would have liked this game over the total, and I still do, but 52.5 is a high number to get over that, and that's the only reservation I have with the over here. I lean to the over. I don't want the under. You're going to get, I think, both of these offenses that will have some advantages. I think the Cowboys offense should have some advantages against Atlanta's defense and vice versa with the Falcons offense against the Cowboys defense. But 52.5, that's a high total to have to get up and over in this game. Dallas, like I say, McCarthy and this team was okay at times last week against the Rams, but at the end of the day, I think they're just going to be one of those teams. It's difficult for them to win by margin. I agree with the early move to Atlanta. For me, if I'm looking at side and total in this game, it would be the Falcons for me plus the points and the over in this game. I did have this game circled for Atlanta and the over early in the week. Unfortunately, I fiddled around too much, didn't bet it early in the week, lost the best number with Atlanta, lost the best number with the total because this total opened up 49.5, 50 in most spots, and now it's 52.5. But definitely if I'm betting this one, it would be Falcons and over for me against the Dallas Cowboys. Buffalo, Miami, we've got Buffalo 5.5 point favorites, 41 the total in this one. I laid the 5.5 with Buffalo here, and I didn't think twice about it. I actually this is another one. I missed the best of it because Buffalo opened 3.5, and they went up to 5.5 here for this game on Sunday. But Miami looked like dog shit last week. I'll just come right out and say it. They looked horrendous against the New England Patriots. And if not for some turnovers by Newton and the New England team early in the game and just some red zone issues, that could have gotten ugly very quickly for the Miami Dolphins last week. Ryan Fitzpatrick turned into Ryan Pickpatrick at times in the second half. Ryan Shitzpatrick, the names we usually come up with for him. And if you were a New England Patriots backer last week laying the 6.5, 7, it was a Ryan Pickpatrick interception in the red zone that allowed you to hang on for the point spread cover last week for the Patriots against the Miami Dolphins. Miami's offensive line does not look good at all. And that to me is where this could get out of hand or get out of reach in a hurry for the Miami Dolphins. You're going up against an elite defense, a Bills defense that gets pressure on opposing quarterbacks, that can stop the run, that has the potential to make Ryan Fitzpatrick a one-dimensional, or make this offense one-dimensional and force the game to be decided on the arm of Ryan Fitzpatrick. And that's not where you want any game to be decided if you're a team with Ryan Fitzpatrick as your quarterback. This is a problem, I think, for Miami. Matchup-wise, it's a big-time problem for them. On the flip side, I believe it or not, I think the Bills could be laying more, because I think they could have blown out the Jets even more of a margin than they did last week. Again, if not for a couple fumbles by Josh Allen, which is the one area he's still got to get better at. And sometimes the deep ball throw sails on him and gets away from him a little bit. But again, ball security, to me, he fumbles the ball too much. I mean, it doesn't take much. You just basically hit him, and there's a chance the ball will come out. He's got to protect the football better than that moving forward. I mean, at some point, that's going to be it's going to hurt Buffalo in a game where they play better teams than the Jets or this Miami team that they're going to play here. So, the Bills have one of the best defenses in this league, in my opinion. And it's worth noting, too, Devontae Parker, who's probably the best receiver on this Dolphins team, he got injured last week and left that game. Will he play? That remains to be seen. But again, especially, it's already tough enough for this Miami team, in my opinion, in this game against this Bills defense and a great secondary as well. Tre'Davious White, although they did lose a member of that secondary to injury last week, the Bills. But they still have Trey White. You've still got an outstanding overall defense. You got players at all three levels of the defense that can make impact plays. And for the Miami Dolphins, it's just going to be difficult. Their offensive line just could get absolutely overwhelmed here by this Bills team. Buffalo's done very well against Miami. Even in Miami, the Bills have had no problem going down there and getting the win. Not getting the best number here, but there's been times when I've backed off a game because I missed the best number by 2.5 points, and then that team ends up rolling, and I'm like, why did I hesitate? Why did I still not go ahead and bet it? Sometimes you've got to be willing. Most of the time you want to get that great closing line value. I get it. But sometimes it's worth it to say, you know what? I'm still going to go ahead and take this team. There's matchup advantages to be had. And for me, it's Buffalo here, laying 5.5 on the road. Can they win by a touchdown or more? I think they can. I think it's going to be a tough year for Brian Flores down there in Miami. That was the final score ended up being a little bit flattering to Miami last week against New England. Probably up against it here in my mind. So I laid the 5.5 here with Buffalo in this one. Next up, we've got Carolina, Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay 8.5-point favorites, 47.5 the total in this game. This is one of those games. Be wary of the overreaction. And the overreaction for Tampa Bay after the loss to the New Orleans Saints last week was, Brady's done. Brady's old. Brady's over the hill. He can't do it anymore. Let's be careful when it comes to falling into that rhetoric and buying into it, because he's playing for, first of all, it was the first game in this new offense, which is a completely different type of offense than New England ran with him, which was run heavy, short to intermediate passes. Bruce Arians, you take deep shots down the field. You're working with a new offensive line, new signals, new scheme, new receiving core. First game for Brady in this scenario, and he was doing it against, I think, a New Orleans defense that's got the potential to be top 5 defense in the NFL this year. So, yeah, it was a terrible game for him. Two interceptions, one of them being the pick six by Janoris Jenkins that really shifted this game in New Orleans' favor. No doubt about that. But let's be careful. Let's see what he does here. Let's just at least give Tom Brady, who's going to end up being the greatest quarterback of all time in this league, let's give him a chance to maybe make amends for last week against a defense that is nowhere near the quality of defense the New Orleans Saints have. This Carolina defense just looks almost hopeless. And I know for them, it was only one game to see their defense on the field, but from a personnel standpoint, the Carolina Panthers on defense were gutted last year. Absolutely gutted. They lost key pieces all over that defense. We know Luke Kuechly retired. We know that Bradbury, one of their cornerbacks, moved on as well. There's new pieces on the defensive line as well. New scheme and coordinator for the Panthers with the beginning of the Matt Rule era. And that defense was just, they couldn't get a stop. If you watch that game last week, the Las Vegas Raiders are moving that football, marching that football up and down the field, start to finish. They couldn't get any sort of stops on defense last week, Carolina. If I'm Tampa Bay, this is, I think, their chance. This is one of those games where if Tampa Bay doesn't bring their offense to life in this game, then you maybe get a little bit worried about Tom Brady. But I think this is the game where they open it up. They get Ronald Jones going, running the football. By the way, Mike Evans last week, I know he was banged up going into that game against New Orleans, but one catch, 2 yards? Are you kidding me? Are you serious? Come on. What are we doing here? This is an incredible wide receiving talent. Why the hell are we not giving him the ball more? Bruce Arians sort of mentioned that after the game. Tom was talking about that as well after the loss to the Saints, that, hey, we got to feed Mike Evans more, and I expect that. And he has a complete and utter mismatch in his favor against any cornerback that Carolina dares to put on him in this game. I think Tampa Bay, this could be the game where Tom Brady looks more like the old Tom Brady. I'm not going to say he's going to go crazy and go off and 500 yards through the air or anything like that, but this Tampa Bay offense will move the football in this game, will have success putting up points, because this Carolina defense looks like they're in a world of hurt to me this season with all the personnel changes, learning a new defensive scheme as well. Just a bad situation. I mean, look, Las Vegas has a capable offense. Derek Carr, they've got some Josh Jacobs. They've got some good weapons to work with, but still 34 points. I mean, they didn't stop the Raiders at all last week. I think they're going to have trouble against Tampa Bay as well. However, on the flip side, I was impressed with Carolina on offense last week against the Raiders. Teddy Bridgewater, all he does is come in there, play good, play solid, give his team a chance to win. He did that last week. I was impressed by the play calling from Joe Brady, who did an incredible job at LSU last year with Joe Burrow, designing and scheming and game planning an amazing offense throughout the season with LSU. Back in the NFL this year as Carolina's offensive coordinator. I thought he called a pretty impressive game until the 4th and 1 call, obviously, when somehow Christian McCaffrey didn't get the handoff on that 4th and 1 play, and it cost Carolina. But I liked what I saw out of Carolina's offense. They have Christian McCaffrey, one of the best running backs in the NFL. You've got 3 pretty good receivers to work with, and Curtis Samuel, DJ Moore, and then the really good offseason acquisition, Robbie Anderson, who had a big touchdown catch last week as well. You've got some weapons if you're Carolina, and I think you're going to test Tampa Bay as well. So this is a game where I can see Tampa Bay's offense having success. This is a game where I can see Carolina's offense having success. So I've already pulled the trigger over 47.5 here in this game between the Buccaneers and Panthers. It's one of my favorite totals, actually, of week 2. I think Tampa Bay's offense is going to get back to life. Tom Brady will be fine, at least in this game. We'll have to see the rest of the season, but I think this sets up well. He's pissed off. He didn't like the way he played. There's still a good O-line here. Lots of weapons with Evans in the passing game. O.J. Howard as well. I think it's a time for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to get their offense going, but I think Carolina will score points as well. So liking this game over 47.5 between Carolina and Tampa Bay. I lean actually a little bit, and I said last week, Carolina is a dead bet against team for me. But they are getting more than a touchdown here. 8.5, 9 points as an underdog. They were competitive last week, much more competitive than I thought they would be. Maybe a slight lean to Carolina, but again, Matt Rule falls into that 1-4 straight up in ATS beginning to the season for the head coaches with their new team, with the first season with the new team. That's an angle I don't want to be going against right now. So, if you like Tampa Bay, I think you might want to look at them first quarter and first half instead, because you would think they would want to get off to a much better start here in this game after the bad game against New Orleans. So, but for me, I'll definitely probably just have the over in this game, 47.5 between the Panthers and Bucks. Denver-Pittsburgh. We've got Pittsburgh 7.5 point favorites, over a touchdown now. Pittsburgh opened just less than a touchdown. Now they're laying more than a touchdown here in this game against Denver, 40.5 the total. Denver misses Cortland Sutton. And if I'm even going to consider the Broncos side here, I want to know his status because, again, that was a big piece from the offense, and it seemed like, they put a lot on Jerry Jeudy's plate. It seemed like they were targeting, or Drew Lock was targeting Jerry Jeudy quite a bit last week without Courtland Sutton. That's going to be something to monitor moving forward, is going to be how this receiving core fares without Courtland Sutton in it. We'll see if he comes back. I thought the Denver defense, despite the fact that Tennessee won that game with Stephen Gostkowski, who finally decided, I'd better make a field goal in the final few seconds of that game after just having a horrible night for the Tennessee Titans. I thought their defense overall was still pretty solid, the Tennessee Titans, in that game against the Denver Broncos. Offensively, Ryan Tannehill did enough. They sputtered in the red zone repeatedly. You give Denver's defense credit for that, but this is going to be a tricky matchup here for Denver because now you're going on the road facing a Pittsburgh Steelers defense that, man, were they ever impressive last week, Monday night against the Giants, flying to the football, making plays. You look at their defensive line is very, very stout. Bud Dupree had an incredible game in the linebacking core. They've got a solid secondary. Minkah Fitzpatrick, I mean, he's played very well for Pittsburgh ever since they got him in that trade with the Miami Dolphins. It's going to be interesting to see how he fares here. Birdie makes a good point. Jeudy had some nice catches, good receiving yards, but you're right. There were a couple drops, but rookie receiver in his first game. You're going to have to hope that he kind of irons those out moving forward. Yeah, I'm not going to get involved in this game. I'm not going to even try to say, you know what, I lean here, I lean there. I just think it's a little bit of an inflated price on Pittsburgh for as good as they looked against the Giants. If you're going to lay 7.5, your offense still has to have a high degree of efficiency. And for extended parts of that first half, Ben Roethlisberger looked rusty and old as hell. And it really didn't get going for Pittsburgh offensively until late first half and into the second half of that game on Monday night against the New York Giants. I can't have a team play good offense and get it going for one half if I'm going to lay 7.5 points with them. I got to have some confidence that they can get the ball rolling on offense from the start of the football game, finish drives, get it done in the red zone, not settle for field goals. And Denver's defense is still, even without Von Miller, that's what impressed me about Denver. Their defense, even without Von Miller, I thought was pretty solid last week against the Tennessee Titans. The under definitely makes a little bit of sense here in this game. 40.5, it's a low number, but you kind of saw Vic Fangio now with Sutton out. Let's try to win a low-scoring game, rely on our defense. Let's not take too many chances on offense. That was kind of the mindset in that game. So the strongest current betting opinion or stance I have on this game is probably the under. I can't lay more than a touchdown with Pittsburgh, but I will say this, their defense looks great. Question is, can Ben Roethlisberger continue to get better, shake off the rust? There are weapons for Pittsburgh. Juju Smith-Schuster had a great game, which was good to see. He liked having Ben Roethlisberger back, clearly. Juju Smith-Schuster has got to be one of the happiest guys to see Ben back because it just didn't gel well for him with Mason Rudolph or with Duck Hodges. I think having Ben back has helped him. Their receiving core is solid now. It really is. I mean, Deontay Johnson's got potential. You got my fellow Canadian, Chase Claypool. I think that was a great draft pick for them out of Notre Dame. There's a lot to like with Pittsburgh. But again, this offense they played one bad half and one good half against the Giants. I can't count on one bad half and one good half if I'm going to lay more than a touchdown. So it's a pass on the side with a slight lean to the under for me in that game. We move on to Detroit, Green Bay. Green Bay 6-point favorites, 49.5 the total in this game. Call me nuts, but I'm leaning hard to Detroit here. +6. They've given Green Bay fits. 4-2 straight up, 6-0 against the spread the last 6 meetings against the Packers since 2017. For some reason, Detroit has really played Green Bay tough. And I know that was a brutal loss, a horrendous loss, bad as it gets for the Detroit Lions with a 23-6 lead going into the fourth quarter of that game. And 21 unanswered points later, the Bears rally back to win 27-23. And then Detroit has a chance to come down the field in the 2-minute drive late in the fourth quarter They come back and get the lead back, and DeAndre Swift, their rookie running back, drops what would have been a sure touchdown in the end zone. Brutal. Absolutely awful. Another fourth quarter folly, so to speak, from the Detroit Lions. They've had so many blown leads. You remember they played Arizona in a week one. I believe it was last year. Yes, it was. It was last year. They had the lead and they coughed it up against Arizona. I mean, this just happens with Matt Patricia. When you're a poorly coached team, that's what happens to you. And absolutely, it's a situation where they were just gagged it away, coughed up another lead, and Mitch Trubisky got caught fire. The defense sagged a little bit. That prevent defense never gets you anywhere in the NFL. And I thought the Lions sat back. They were doing a good job rushing Trubisky, getting some pressure, being a little bit more aggressive with their front seven. And then all of a sudden they stopped doing that, in the fourth quarter with the big lead. You can't let your foot off the gas pedal in this year's NFL or in today's NFL era where, you could easily, it's not as difficult to get back into a game when you're down double digits, even in the fourth quarter. Detroit found that out the hard way. Let's not forget, Detroit dominated that game for 3 quarters. Dominated both sides of the ball. Stafford, even without Kenny Golladay, his number one receiver, Marvin Jones stepped up. Danny Amendola had a good game. TJ Hawkinson. Keep betting DJ Hawkinson props. I said it on this show last week, right here on Ian Cameron's Football Frenzy. I said it. TJ Hawkinson's props. Look over receiving yards and receptions and even touchdown scoring props with this guy. He is going to be a key focal weapon for Matt Stafford, and it proved that way last week against the Chicago Bears in that game. But look, they played great for 3 quarters. Let's not forget that. The biggest concern I have with Detroit is their secondary is ravaged with injuries. And we saw what Aaron Rodgers last week against Minnesota can do with an inexperienced secondary. He picked it apart, essentially. In Devontae Adams, you got to maybe get some double or triple coverage because he is by far, it's not even close. He absolutely destroys and crushes Alan Lazard and Valdez Scantling and all these other receivers. They have a number one receiver, and then I think they have a bunch of 3-4 receivers. That's the way I see this Packers receiving core right now. So that's the concern. Detroit's got some injuries in that secondary, but I'm not sold on Green Bay's defense. You saw what happened. They gave up 34 points. They won 43-34, but Kirk Cousins and the Vikings moved the ball well against them. And there's a chance that Kenny Golladay might be back for Detroit. And that's going to make this offense even more potentially dangerous for the Lions going into this game on Sunday, even at Lambeau Field. And this is the point spread range you want Detroit. You don't want to lay points with Detroit. We saw that last week. They were laying 3. What happens? They lose outright. You don't necessarily want to back Detroit as a pick 'em either. But when you can get 6 points, 7 points, in some instances more than a touchdown with them as an underdog, that's the kind of price range where you're definitely more comfortable backing the Lions. Now, last year, you're going to see second half of the year when they were dogs of 6, 7, double-digit dogs, you're going to see they were terrible in those games. They were brutal. But let's not forget, Matt Stafford gets injured early in November, and then for the rest of the season, they got Jeff Driscoll and David Blau as their quarterbacks, the Detroit Lions. No wonder they stopped covering point spreads in the underdog role. They just had terrible quarterback play. They were going nowhere. The defense was not great in the second half of the season, and as a result, they had trouble covering those numbers. But when Matt Stafford was healthy prior to his injury last season, early in the year, the Detroit Lions, I went and looked this up, as underdogs of 6 points or more, 3-0 against the spread they were when Matt Stafford was the quarterback under center in that role. Now he's back. Now they're 6-point underdogs here. And I think there's an overreaction here to Green Bay last week. They took advantage of just a Minnesota inexperienced secondary. Xavier Rhodes' play has just gone completely in the tank. I can't explain how poor he's become as an NFL cornerback. I would lean Detroit here. I haven't pulled the trigger on Detroit because I think some bettors may push Green Bay up a little bit further to 6.5. Hell, maybe even 7, which I would love to see that. Let's not forget, 3 strong quarters of football for Detroit last week were wiped away by that bad fourth quarter. And again, we don't need Detroit to win the game here. Be competitive, be good on offense, which I think they can be against the Packers, and they can stay in this football game here against Green Bay. And I also like this game over the total. You're not getting a great number, 47 up to 49 now with this total, but I totally agree with the move. This has shootout potential written all over it at Lambeau Field. Lions and over. Interested in that. Both of them, side and total for the Green Bay, Minnesota game. All right, we're going to pick up the pace here in the last several games here. We've got Jacksonville, Tennessee. Tennessee, 8.5-point favorites, 43 the total. I lean Jacksonville here. I do. It's always risky when you have the team that had the big outright underdog win against Indianapolis last week, coming back the next week and backing them. Sometimes they fall flat off that big win, but you still have the Tennessee Titans on a short week, Monday night, the late Monday night game, coming back home to Tennessee to host the Jaguars, playing on Sunday. Not easy. Definitely not an easy scheduling situation here for the Titans. And if you're going to lay 8.5, you got to show me that you can be very efficient offensively. And I didn't see the Tennessee Titans be very efficient offensively. Here's the problem with the Titans now. You've clearly got a kicking issue with Steven Gostkowski. If you're the Jacksonville Jaguars, if Tennessee drives the ball into your half of the field, just bear down in the red zone, bear down at the 20, 25, 30-yard line, maybe get a big sack, force an incompletion, get to fourth down, and put the pressure on Steven Gostkowski to make a mid to long-range field goal kick. Because clearly he's having issues right now with the with field goal kicking and with his confidence right now. So if you're Jacksonville, going to end up being red zone defense is going to, I think, determine it for you here in this game. It's important for them. And Jacksonville was one of those teams coming into the season. I wasn't sure what we would see from them. I mean, it obviously didn't end well for them last year. You look at them, Gardner Minshew, how is he going to play? The Gardner Minshew now, guys, as a starting quarterback in the NFL, do you know what his straight up record is? Never mind ATS, but straight up, 7-6. Straight up as an NFL starting quarterback for the Jaguars. He's actually got a winning record as a starting quarterback here for the Jacksonville Jaguars. And now he's getting 8.5 points. They've got some confidence. I actually think it's a no-name kind of skill position group. When you look at James Robinson, Chris Thompson, and the running back tandem, the wide receiving core with Keelan Cole and DJ Chark, Laviska Shenault out of Colorado, Tyler Eifert, they bring him in at tight end to pair with James O'Shaughnessy. Again, it's a no-name skill position group, but they made some plays last week against Indianapolis. You got to give them credit for that. Now, their defense was fortuitous because they gave up a lot of yards. They gave up a ton of yards last week to the Colts. But the Colts, again, Rivers had some turnover issues. That was a concern. And Jacksonville's defense forced those turnovers and got stops when they needed. Yeah, the box score wasn't pretty for them, but at the end of the day, they're the team that won the game. Again, with Tennessee, their offense sputtered in the red zone. They've got concerns with their field goal kicker. I'm going to have some kind of small bet on Jacksonville. It's not a best bet type of thing for me, but again, when you have Tennessee already showing signs that, look, last year Tannehill was great and he was all right in the first game against Denver, but we've got Tennessee now laying a big number with an offense that I've got some question marks about. Derrick Henry's going to have a big day for sure because the passing game didn't necessarily click at any point against Denver or impress me for the Titans last week. So definitely for me, lean to the Jacksonville Jaguars plus 8.5 there. Rams and Eagles. Rams 1-point favorite, 45.5 the total in this game. This is a really, really tough game. I like the under more than anything. 45.5. This is a bet for me under the total. Look, the Eagles' offensive line was hideous last week against Washington. Washington can get after it. I talked about their defensive front last week. It is better than a lot of people think. Never mind about what hair product I use, Tony Manga. Thank you. I appreciate you like that. No, it's if you insist, it is Garnier. Garnier Fructis is what I don't know if it's available in the States, but I know it's available here in Canada. So there you go. There's your answer to that. But getting back to Rams and Eagles, I don't know if the Eagles move the football here. A lot was made, even by me last week, about the Rams losing a ton on defense. But a lot of those guys, they were coming off career seasons, and some of them were older players. They brought back a lot of youth, but this looked like youth that could play. I mean, that was supposed to be a very explosive Dallas Cowboy offense last week, and the Rams, I thought, made a very strong account of themselves defensively. Jalen Ramsey, proved why he could be one of the better elite cornerbacks in the league with his play last week. The Eagles' offensive line got trampled. Brandon Brooks and the Lane Johnson injuries are huge. There's no guarantee they get either of those guys back here. I don't know how they consistently move the ball against the Rams, even at home. But on the flip side, you got road Jared Goff. And there has been, throughout his career, a pretty sharp home road dichotomy and a pretty sharp home road split here with Jared Goff in terms of his offensive production and efficiency at home compared to on the road. And Philadelphia's defense against the Rams' offensive line in particular, I think they can match up pretty well. The side is very difficult here for me. Philadelphia falls into a really, really strong long-term trend. A team that lost outright as a bigger favorite is usually in week one, is usually a very strong bet in week two. Philly falls into that. The Colts fall into that, and San Francisco falls into that this week. But I don't think I could take Philly with just how inept they looked against Washington. But the Rams going from west to east for an early start, and Jared Goff's production, and the Rams offense usually doesn't play as well on the road. I think it's just better to stick to the under here. 45.5. I do think this is probably a little bit of a lower scoring game. And it's worth noting too, with the Rams offense and their play calling last week, it was a lot of dink and dunk. They didn't really take a lot of deep shots down the field. Very short to intermediate passing game. And if that continues here, that's definitely going to be a benefit if you like the under. Minnesota, Indianapolis, Indy 3-point favorites, 48.5 the total. I'm definitely leaning toward the Vikings here. I mean, you're getting a field goal with them after just a brutal game for them against the Packers. But Aaron Rodgers, I'd rate him a little bit higher than Phillip Rivers right now. Phillip Rivers had some good moments last week. Moved the football, was impressive. But to me, still the same Phillip Rivers at times in terms of mistakes, bad decisions, underthrowing the football, interceptions at the worst time. The things that we've become very accustomed to seeing from Rivers, especially last year, the last couple of years. I lean Minnesota here. This is another total that's gone up. I can understand why, because the Vikings secondary is still a worry for me. The Colts defense, didn't exactly play great against Gardner Minshew and a Jaguars offense that, if they struggled against Jacksonville, Kirk Cousins, Dalvin Cook, Adam Thielen, this Vikings offense should be able to make some plays against them. So I like Minnesota +3 over 48.5. Definitely on the radar. Haven't bet them yet, but definitely if I'm looking side and total, that's where I'm looking with the with the Vikings and the Colts. Giants and Bears. Bears 5.5-point favorites, 42 the total in this game. I'm not laying 5.5 with Chicago, but Giants short week on the road. Daniel Jones and this offensive line against Chicago's defense, which their defensive line had some injuries last week, Chicago, no question. But they might get some reinforcements along that defensive line for this game. Joe Judge and the Giants, again, they fall into that 1-4 straight up in ATS angles so far with the teams with the new head coach. And that's definitely something that's going to keep me off the Giants. But you won't see me laying 5.5 here with the Chicago Bears. Just not going to do it. Not with Mitchell Trubisky, who played one good quarter. And I think a product of that was Detroit kind of falling asleep at the wheel when they were up 23-6. The under definitely is in play. That would be the thing I would consider betting. There's the total. Look under the total, 42. But I'm going to stay off the side there. 49ers and Jets. Look, a lot of people love San Fran here because the Jets looked abysmal against the Bills. San Fran laying 6.5 here, total 42. Yeah, I understand that to a certain degree. The Jets were awful last week. Sam Darnold looked terrible. The offense couldn't get in rhythm. Le'Veon Bell did nothing. This receiving core for the Jets doesn't impress me. I think Robbie Anderson's a big loss for them. He was really good for them at receiver last year. Now you've got, Brashad Perriman. Jamison Crowder's all right. He had a big play. I'll give him credit. Chris Hogan, though, but he's been bounced around and sort of, I think his best years were really in New England for Chris Hogan. I don't think he's the same guy now. Running back issues. Frank Gore is now going to take over because Le'Veon Bell's on the IR. to me, the skill position talent's not great around Sam Darnold here with the Jets. Defensively, they got gashed by the Bills. The Bills moved up and down the field against the Jets. Here's the problem, though, with San Francisco. All right. And the Jets were terrible. I can't really strongly endorse the Jets here. But the 49ers are a mash unit injury-wise right now. They've got multiple receivers that are questionable. Deebo Samuel, they missed him badly last week. Jimmy Garoppolo had really developed some great chemistry with him last year in the run to the Super Bowl. He's out. There's a couple other receivers that are banged up and questionable. George Kittle got injured last week. He's questionable. And their offensive line's got problems right now, the San Francisco Giants as well. The San Francisco 49ers, they're a group that's got a really, really banged up O-line coming out of the game against Arizona. And unless I see, a clearer and better injury report for these for this O-line for San Francisco coming into this game, there's no way I'm comfortable laying 6.5 and almost a full touchdown with them here on the road. I'm not. So it's a very, very tricky game. The under is another bet that makes sense. It's the same total as the Giants-Bears game. But as of right now, I'm not involved in this game, 49ers or Jets. Believe it or not, if it gets to 7, and if the 49ers injury picture doesn't get better, doesn't get clearer between now and Sunday, I may have to just close my eyes, hold my nose, and take the Jets. Because I think there's issues with San Francisco. Big time. O-line banged up. Richard Sherman, also the secondary, already on IR this season for the 49ers. There's issues right now. Cluster injuries at wide receiver. George Kittle banged up. Cluster injuries in the secondary. The offensive line. Yeah, that's not a team I'm comfortable laying almost a touchdown with. Sorry. Yeah, even though the Jets were absolutely miserable last week against the Bills. So that's a really tough game for me, probably staying off it. Washington football team, Arizona Cardinals. Arizona 6.5-point favorites, 47 the total. That total, I understand the total being 47 with Arizona involved. They play in terms of seconds per snap. They're one of the fastest paced teams in the NFL. Their offense with Kyler Murray, DeAndre Hopkins, it's a really good offense. Christian Kirk, Larry Fitzgerald still got something in the tank. Kenyon Drake in the running back as the starting back. This is a good offense, absolutely. But you're going to be tested here by Washington. Washington's defensive front is no joke. That's the strength of that team. The question for me is, can Arizona's offensive line block them? If they can, then the potential is there for Arizona to pick apart the secondary. That is still a weak part of this Washington football team going into it. It's a really, really interesting game. I cashed with Arizona. It was one of my favorite sides last week, them getting the points against San Francisco, but now they're laying 6.5, 7. Here's an interesting stat for you about Arizona. When was the last time they were favored? They have been favored 3 times. 3 times, Arizona. Since 2017, they went 0-3 straight up as favorites. 0-3 straight up since 2017. So they not only didn't cover as favorites, they lost the game outright. The Arizona Cardinals, the 3 times that they've been favored in a game since 2017. That's definitely concerning for me. Look, I love this Arizona team. I think they've got potential to be at least contending to win the NFC West. I'm not going to say win it because you've still got Seattle to deal with, the Rams to deal with, San Francisco to deal with. I'm saying they could contend, though, to win the NFC West. I like them a lot. I'm not sure in this spot, though, I'm ready to lay 6.5, 7 with them, especially when I know the Washington football team, they're playing hard for Rivera. We know Rivera's had health issues, cancer scare. You could see how emotional and just this whole scenario has brought them together as a team. Hell, Rivera's the one coach that was able to get a win straight up in ATS in terms of the new head coaches with their new team. He's the only one that got it done last week. So I'm not in a rush to bet against Washington here. I was impressed with their resolve, especially when it got off to such a brutal start in the first quarter against Philadelphia last week. That game could have easily gotten away from them. but they reeled it back in, and they were a lot better at that from that point on. Their defense got after Wentz. Even Dwayne Haskins started to get a little something going offensively for them. So this is a really, really fascinating game. I'm not betting against Arizona, but I'm not rushing to lay 6.5 with them here. Total's pretty tough here in this game here because I just don't know if Washington can score enough to send it over the total when it's all said and done. Baltimore, Houston, Baltimore 7-point favorites, 50 the total in this game. I think Baltimore first half, first quarter makes sense. I don't know if I'd want to lay 7 for the game, but look, this Baltimore team, they are playing at a machine-like surgical level. Outside of the bad loss in the playoffs against Tennessee, even down the stretch of last season, the second half, they were an ATS machine. They were just destroying teams left and right. I'm not going to say it's going to be this way every single week for Baltimore, but they're just not a team I have a inkling to bet against right now. From a Ravens standpoint, I'm either looking Baltimore or pass from a side perspective in their games. And I'm certainly not going to take my chances fading Baltimore with a Bill O'Brien coach team. Not after what I saw last week. You saw the tweet from DeAndre Hopkins after the Houston game against Kansas City. Like, I'm blessed for being here in Arizona. He wanted to get the hell out of Houston. He wanted to get the hell away from Bill O'Brien and his buffoonery more than anybody. No, I don't like I don't like the vibes around this Houston team. Their defense looks pathetic. I know it was Kansas City last week, but they couldn't get any stops. That doesn't bode well against the Baltimore Ravens offense with Lamar Jackson and company here. But I'm a little bit cautious about laying 7 on the road here with Baltimore. I'd prefer Baltimore first quarter, first half than I would the full game here. Good point in the chat by Jansen. Good to see you. They play Kansas City in week 3. Obviously, that's a huge game. You do have to consider that. You know, they maybe look past Houston a little bit. Even if they do look past Houston, can Houston play good enough on defense to stop this Baltimore team? I mean, Hollywood Brown, outstanding. Mark Andrews is becoming an elite tight end. I mean, he's not on the George Kittle, Zach Ertz, Travis Kelce level just yet at tight end, but Mark Andrews, keep an eye on this guy. He is becoming a better and better tight end as we go along here with this Ravens team. Great game from him last week. The spot is definitely the hesitation point here for me. I don't want Houston, but you do have to factor Baltimore's got the big potential AFC championship showdown with Kansas City next week. I'm saying that because to me, that's got a real potential to be the AFC championship, Ravens and Chiefs. No question about that. So I don't want Houston. I can tell you that right now. The total looks high because I don't know what Houston's going to be doing offensively. Deshaun Watson looked a little bit lost at times without Hopkins. They really should be better offensively than they showed last week, even without Hopkins, because you've still got, Kenny Stills. You've still got capable enough receiving core here with Will Fuller, Brandon Cooks, who's questionable, but he played last week. I would think he plays this week as well. David Johnson actually did show some flashes of his old self for the Houston Texans. Of course, he came back the other way in the DeAndre Hopkins trade, but I just to me, there's a real lot of bad signs and red flags for me surrounding the Houston team. Bad body language. I don't want to say they're getting tired of O'Brien and they're tuning him out, but if this is another bad loss and they get drubbed in this game, you're really going to have to start thinking that maybe that O'Brien's lost the group, and this game could go a long way to determining whether that's the case. If they fight their tails off and they give Baltimore a game here, maybe that's a sign that, hey, they haven't completely tuned out the coach yet, but they're going to have to obviously play a good game here for me to be buying into the fact that the Texans are not in trouble, and I think they are in some trouble. So it's a tricky game, but I don't want Houston. It would be still Baltimore, nothing. Chiefs and Chargers. Chiefs 8.5-point favorites, 47.5 the total in this game. Look, Kansas City looked great. This total's taken a big hit downward, and I could see that. Kansas City ran the football a lot more last week with Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I mean, outstanding debut in his rookie performance as the starting running back. Because remember, Damian Williams opted out because of COVID-19. So Clyde Edwards-Helaire all of a sudden is going to get a lot more chance. They ran the football a lot. This was not the Patrick Mahomes air show last week against Houston. It was short to intermediate passes, run the football a lot. And I think bettors are reacting to that and taking the under here in this Chiefs-Chargers game. No question. It seems like a lot of points to lay with Kansas City. It really does. In a division game on the road, 8.5. But we talked about this with Andy Reid in the division games. He's almost a coach you can't bet against in these spots. He has an incredible, unreal, straight up an ATS record in division games. It's ridiculous how good it is for Andy Murray and this Kansas City Chiefs team. They've won and covered 10 straight games now, the Chiefs, dating back to last season after the win against Houston. That's tough to go against, too. 10-0 ATS, last 10 games for Kansas City going back to last year. That's tough to go against that. I think there's value on the Chargers. I do. 8.5 in a division game with a competent enough defense. Here's the problem. If Kansas City gets the offense going even a little bit in this game, and they go up by 10 or 14 or 17 points, Tyrod Taylor going to be the guy to lead them back through the back door. And this offense, I'm not so sure. I'm really not sure. That's my worry here with backing the LA Chargers. And let's not forget Joe Burrow and the Bengals. We talked about him earlier in the show. Joe Burrow looked pretty good at times against that very good Chargers defense. And if Joe Burrow is able to drive the Bengals down the field to put them in position to win the game against that Chargers defense late in the game, what on earth could Pat Mahomes and this explosive Kansas City offense do? So to me, it's a pass on the side. I cannot bring myself to bet against a team that's now covered 10 straight football games going back to last year. I won't do it. The under makes sense. If you got in early, like when it was, I believe, around 50, it was 49 as well. It's down to 47.5. I think it's Kansas City being a little bit more time of possession oriented, running the football more now that they've found Clyde Edwards-Helaire. So interesting that they've slowed down their pace quite a bit based on what we saw against Houston. The Chargers are going to be a very slow-paced, methodical offense as well with Tyrod Taylor on the other side. And I do think the Chargers defense is certainly capable enough to put up more resistance against the Chiefs offense than the Texans were last week. So I do agree with the under, but the problem is that the value is diminished now at 47.5. All right, last two games, New England, Seattle, Sunday Night Football. Seattle 4-point favorite, 45 the total. You don't get New England as an underdog very often. That's for sure. And that's always intriguing to me. The New England Patriots, they were favored in every game last year. And now here they are in week 2 this year. They're an underdog. So that tells you the changing of the tide, or turning of the tide, so to speak, now with Tom Brady gone. But Cam Newton was fine. He was serviceable. I don't want to say he was great, but he was good. 15 of 19 passing. He ran the ball for 75 yards as well. They ran the football very effectively as well with Sony Michel and the running back group. I was impressed. And it was Miami, and it was at home. But I was impressed with what I saw from New England in that game. Russell Wilson was incredible against Atlanta. That offense looked great with DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. I still remember Joe Tessitore on Monday Night Football. I think it was last year, calling him Decaf Metcalf. Like, can I get a cup of coffee here, Metcalf? Decaf Metcalf. That was pretty funny hearing him screw that up last year. I still laugh every time I remember that. But, Seattle's offense was great. The question now is going to be New England running the football with success against Miami. They're going to be able to run the football with success here against Seattle, because Seattle's defense to me has question marks, but most of those are in the pass defense. Most of those are in the secondary. I think Seattle, my concern with, and I lean to New England here because you just don't get Bill Belichick and the Patriots catching more than a field goal very often. But my concern is, does Cam Newton have it in him to make big plays and maybe have to be more of a passing quarterback in this kind of game to lead his team to victory on the road? That's going to be the question mark. I'm not sure yet New England can run the football to the same level of success in this game against Seattle like they did last week. That's going to be fascinating to watch here in this game. For me, still from a side perspective, it's New England or nothing. I haven't bet this yet. I may not, but if I were to bet this game, I would be looking at New England +4. Again, you don't get them I was impressed with what I saw last week. They're undervalued. And let's not diminish the fact that this Seattle Seahawks team at home, without that 12th man, without that incredible home field advantage they usually get from playing in Seattle, it is not going to be there this time. No fans. That home crowd advantage is that Seattle usually thrives on when they play at CenturyLink Field there in Seattle. Not going to be there this time. And that could make things easier for New England. Certainly going to make things easier for Cam Newton and the Patriots offense in terms of, calling the plays at the line. So for me, it's a lean to New England. I'm not sure yet if I'm going to pull the trigger, but that's where I would lean in that game. Monday Night Football to wrap up our NFL Week 2 breakdown. Saints Raiders. Saints 5.5-point favorites, 49.5 the total in this game. This is another game where the total's been bet down a little bit from the opener. Saints 5.5-point favorites. I'm definitely considering Las Vegas here in this game. I really am. Saints were good last week, got past Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay was not in a great spot, I think, to play well last week because, again, first game for Tom Brady, the new offense, had some trouble with it. Saints defense, very good. I understand that. But the offense wasn't great because, let's be honest, 14 of the points that the Saints got were directly off those Tom Brady turnovers that put them in good field position. And, of course, the other turnover was the pick six. They didn't have to do anything on offense. But to me, Drew Brees and the offense for the Saints last week was pedestrian. They were okay, but they weren't great by any stretch of the imagination. And I'm looking at this with, you got to go on the road. You got to have a high degree of efficiency offensively when you're a 5.5-point road favorite like the Saints are. I would have liked this more for Vegas if they had the fans with them in their new stadium. Of course, this is the first game in their brand new stadium, and I'm sure they're still going to be excited because of it. But boy, I mean, without the fans, it takes away a lot of that big adrenaline rush and energy that you might have had with the new stadium. But I liked what I saw out of Las Vegas offensively. Now, again, I've got big-time issues with Carolina on defense. I think they're going to really struggle on defense. Maybe that was also a product of why Derek Carr and the Raider offense looked so good last week. But I'll give them credit. They weren't stopped by Carolina one bit. I think they had one punt the entire game. That was it. Derek Carr looked good. Josh Jacobs not only running the football, but catching it as well. Hunter Renfrow, Nelson Aguilar, Brian Edwards, and, of course, Henry Ruggs, the draft pick out of Alabama at wide receiver. They all contributed in the win against Carolina last week. I think that Las Vegas looked very good offensively, and they're the kind of team that if you were to take them plus 5.5 points in this spot, if they're down by 7 or 10 late in the game, they can get a touchdown for you through the back door, capable of doing that. And Michael Thomas is out. Yes, he's out indefinitely. The question is, Saints struggled offensively last week. They're playing against a Las Vegas defense that didn't necessarily do a great job containing Teddy Bridgewater and the Panthers last week in his first start, learning a brand new offense. So, that's always the worry that, even though Drew Brees and the Saints offense didn't look great, Kamara was contained last week in the game. And without Michael Thomas, all of a sudden, you have to rely a lot more on Emmanuel Sanders, who's just joined the team, Traquan Smith, who's been inconsistent, who's had some drop passes, who's also been injured at times. There is a immense drop-off without Michael Thomas on the field at wide receiver. There's question marks with every other receiver for the Saints. Sanders, Smith. Then you really get deep into the depth chart with Marquez Callaway and Deontay Harris. So it's an issue. And I think for the Saints, they don't have that. Wow, we've got plan B, plan C, plan D. We've got option 2, option 3, option 4 that we all have faith in, all have confidence in to make plays in the passing game for us when Michael Thomas doesn't play. That's the concern that I've got for New Orleans here. So this is a game where even with the Raiders looking sketchy, and I mean sketchy on defense, if not for a horrendous 4th-and-1 play call by Carolina, maybe the Panthers go down the field and win that game last week against the Raiders. But the Raiders, at least they got the stop, even though it was some of Carolina's own doing. I would still lean to Las Vegas here a little bit, plus 5.5. And Saints on the road, we'll have to see if they're able to carry it over. That was a big divisional win. Now you're playing the Raiders here. So I'm looking at, I'm considering the Raiders. I don't love it. But if I were to get involved in the Monday night game, I would lean to Las Vegas. You're plus 5.5. Birdie in the chat saying, there is some truth to that. No question. The Saints have actually been better on the road ATS the last couple seasons than at home. There's no question. But you look at it, first ever game in Las Vegas for the Raiders, even with no fans. I think they're going to be excited about that. Defense did struggle, but going to be a situation where, let's also keep in mind too that the offense that the Las Vegas Raiders faced last week, the Carolina offense, runs a very similar scheme and system to what New Orleans does. Because Joe Brady, who is now the Carolina offensive coordinator, was with Sean Payton in New Orleans years ago. Similar style offense. So the offense that they're going to see from the Saints isn't a big, steep learning curve or difference from the offense that the Raiders saw last week against Carolina. Obviously, it's probably a little, maybe a higher degree of offense compared to Bridgewater and the Panthers, but similar. So it's not like you're going from a completely different type of offense, going from playing Carolina last week to New Orleans here on Monday night for this Las Vegas Raiders defense. So maybe that makes the adjustment and the preparation for this game a little bit easier. So leaning to Las Vegas there, plus 5.5. But right now, I've not made a bet yet on that game. All right, we're going to wrap up the show in a couple minutes. Couple college football games I'll throw at you, just a couple. Houston, Baylor 4.5-point favorites in that game. The total 62. I got questions about Baylor coming into this season. They lost a lot on defense. That defense was great last year, but they lost a lot on defense. Only 2 starters back on that side of the ball. They do bring back Charlie Brewer. They have some good skill position talent. I think their offense is probably going to be ahead of their defense. And one thing we talked about, first, new head coaches with new team in the NFL struggling, same in college. And you got Dave Naranda here for the Baylor Bears taking over as the head coach. They didn't have much practice time, new schemes, not a bunch of returning starters, especially on defense. That's a dubious favorite, in my opinion. Big 12's gotten their asses handed to them as well in some of these non-conference games so far. Houston under Dana Holgorsen once again this year. They bring back Clayton Tune at quarterback, who is, I think, capable. He's definitely got a lot of starting experience under his belt. The Baylor defense, I think, suspect coming into the season with all the new faces. Houston's taken a lot of money, and I agree with it. I think they're live in this game. Plus 4.5 still on the Houston Cougars side. Definitely like Houston there in that game. And I got to talk about, obviously, the big primetime game. That's the other one I decided to talk about. Miami, Louisville. Louisville 2.5-point favorites, 64 the total. I cashed a ticket with Louisville last week, laying the 11.5 against Western Kentucky. Don't be fooled by the final score. Louisville kicked the tar out of Western Kentucky. Western Kentucky's points came off of a block punt, set them up with short field, and the other one, I think, was a fumble by Louisville in their own territory, and Western Kentucky had a short field from that. They didn't move the ball much at all against Louisville's defense, and that's what I like about Louisville coming into this season. Scott Satterfield's done a great job. He inherited a dumpster fire after Bobby Petrino got fired. 1-11 they were that last year with Petrino. It was a despicable, and they quit. They flat out gave up on the season. The effort was terrible down the stretch. Satterfield comes in. They go 8-5 straight up in ATS last year in his first year as the head coach. They win a bowl game against Mississippi State. No fly-by night either. They beat Mississippi State in their bowl game out of the SEC. This is a good team. Mikael Cunningham, great quarterback. Atwell, receiver. Atkins, the running back. This is a trio that is going to light up opposing defenses, including, I think, this Miami defense, which has got a lot of returning or a lot of personnel turnover from last year. UAB didn't exactly take advantage of it. Louisville will. And remember, that was Miami facing UAB at home. Now they got to go on the road and take on this Louisville team. I think it's going to be a tougher ask. And De'Ara King, I liked what I saw to Miami's offense. They were able to run the football, and that's always a concern. Louisville defensively last year was terrible, especially against the run and especially against mobile quarterbacks. But all I read in the offseason and coming into the Western Kentucky game last week from Louisville was, guess what? Our defense is a whole lot better than it was. We're ready to stop the run. We feel we're going to not be bullied. We're not going to be manhandled in the trenches like we were last year. We're going to stop the run. We're going to be better against mobile quarterbacks. And Terrell Pigram, the transfer from Maryland, was Western Kentucky's quarterback last week. And Pigram, who's a dual threat quarterback, is capable of running with the football. They shut him down. He didn't do anything running the football. Louisville lived up to their word. They told everybody that would listen, our defense is better. Better overall, better against the run, better against mobile quarterbacks. And I think that's going to show here against Miami because it's a very similar style of offense that Miami is going to bring to the table here that Western Kentucky did. So, and I'm high on Louisville. I cashed with them last week. They're laying less than a field goal. I know they got absolutely blown out. They got absolutely whipped by Miami last year, but that was last year. Miami, again, that was early in the season too. Miami fell apart late in the season, and Louisville now is better this year. And Miami opened the favorite in this game, believe it or not. Miami, I think, was a 1.5 point favorite. Now Louisville's a 2.5 point favorite. A ton of money's come in on Louisville, and I understand why. I'm high on Louisville. I cashed with them last week, and I'll be on Louisville once again here in this big matchup against Miami. One last thing about college football before I wrap up the show. Be weary of the COVID-19 outbreak situations. 3 teams going into this weekend's action. Florida Atlantic, the 2 Louisiana teams, UL Monroe and Louisiana Tech, all of them with massive amounts of player COVID-19 infections the last couple weeks. What has that meant to them? It means they haven't practiced a lot. It means you don't have no clue whatsoever if these guys that have been infected, especially the starters, if they're going to be available to play on Saturday. And you will notice that these 3 teams I've mentioned, Florida Atlantic, UL Monroe, Louisiana Tech, the betting markets have been betting against these teams hand over fist all week long. Florida Atlantic Georgia Southern's taken a ton of money against Florida Atlantic. Texas State has taken a ton of money against Monroe. Southern Miss has taken a ton of money against Louisiana Tech, and I don't argue with it one bit. These teams, you could be seeing a ton of second, third string players on both sides of the football lining up on the field for La Tech, Monroe, and Florida Atlantic this weekend. And think about how bad it is for Florida Atlantic. It's already tough enough if you got second and third stringers. You also have a new head coach. You didn't have much returning talent from last year. New head coach after Lane Kiffin went to Ole Miss. It's a brutal situation for them. So be aware of that. There's a reason why those 3 teams, people are betting against them a ton. Florida Atlantic, UL Monroe, and Louisiana Tech. Severe COVID-19 situations with all 3 of those teams going into Saturday. That'll wrap it up, guys. That's all I got for you. Hopefully it was enough. Hopefully it should be. It was an hour and a half. I keep saying I'm going to try to keep these shows to an hour, but we end up going overtime. You would expect that from me, who can talk probably for hours about these games. But we got through every NFL Week 2 game, some college football as well. Thank you, Birdie. Boston Nick, what up? You're doing a great job with your MMA shows here on Pub Sports Radio. Keep up the good work. Connor Mack, good to see you, one of my colleagues as well. Preston, Jansen, Alex Gagnon, go on and on down the list. Mark Unkefer was here earlier in the chat as well. Alex Ramirez, everybody, 1991 handicapper, Trans-Canada, everybody in the chat, and anyone I missed, I apologize, but thank you for watching. We're going to be doing this show each and every Thursday live at 1 o'clock p.m. Eastern time right here on the Pub Sports Radio YouTube channel, breaking down every NFL game and some college football as well. This is Ian Cameron's Football Frenzy. Hope you enjoyed the show. Good luck this weekend in the NFL and college football, and I'll see you again right here next Thursday at 1 o'clock p.m. Eastern time for another edition of Ian Cameron's Football Frenzy presented by Pub Sports Radio.